Let's make a stitch pattern. Today we're working with the bobble stitch. The bobble stitch is a lovely pattern that jumps out from beyond your fabric and makes a fun little bump or bubble, and we call it a bobble. I actually am going to show you 3 different types of bobbles today. You can make them in various widths and lengths and also the thicknesses of how they're decreased that make different shapes. So if you need a bigger bobble, a medium, or a small, different sizes are up to you. You can actually change the pattern. If it says make bobble, you can make one the way you want to make it, test it, and see if you want it bigger or smaller, depending upon what else is going on in your knitting. So I'm here to show you 3 different ways. We'll go over different increases, different decreases, and also different widths in our stitch patterns. Welcome to GoodKnit Kisses. We're all about helping you stitch your love and love your stitches. We are going to be working with any size of needles and appropriate weight yarn, but if you want this bonus pattern for making a 12 by 12 bobble pattern like this one, or this 7 by 9 or 9 by 7 for Warm Up America squares, be sure and click down below in the video description. If you would like a right or left-handed video, we also have the links down below to that tutorial. I am going to mention information for right-handers. If I say right or left, just know that on the left-hand video, it's just going to be flipped for you. It's not significant to it. All of your bobbles will be the same. All right, let's dive right in. We're going to make a sample that's only 11 stitches wide, and it's going to feature all 3 of these bobbles. Now, I am going to have a timestamp down below so you can jump right ahead to that particular bobble. But while you're knitting up your sample, I want you to be able to hear a few things about bobbles and general differences so that you can know where you can make changes and use them for different patterns. So if you are a beginner, know that I'm not going to cover beginner things, but I do have a video link in a series to casting on, knitting, and purling so that you can get those basics out of the way. But this is a more advanced step to learn. So if you want to learn how to do increases, you can absolutely learn on this one. Just know that when you watch the video, just go ahead and watch it through the first time. And when you're ready to begin, then you'll want to maybe put it on slow and attempt it yourself using that pause and rewind button as needed. So go ahead and cast on 11 stitches, and we're going to work in stockinette to make this nice stockinette background. So on this sample here, I've casted on 11, then I turned it over, worked my purl row, turned it over to the right side, worked my knit row, and then I worked 3 more rows. So you're casting on 11, knitting 5 rows, and meet me back at this point here. You can timestamp to jump right to the bobble of choice, or you can listen to this while you knit. All right, so in general, a stockinette background or field allows the bobbles to stand out for a textured fabric. A bobble can be a variety of widths and length and can vary from pattern to pattern, not only in size, but in how you make it or the execution. A bobble is made by increasing a number of stitches into one stitch and working to different widths, and they can be a variety of widths, working those stitches in a small flat panel back and forth for a number of rows, and then the bobble is decreased to close it so it forms an outward bump on the right side of the knitting. There's different ways to increase and decrease to get different looking bobbles as well, and the knitter can choose to follow a pattern or your own method to make bobbles and choose the size. So try knitting different ones on swatches to experience your favorite and on the different sizes you can make. I'm going to show you 3 different bobbles using a few different increase methods and decrease methods to make different sizes. Here's a few generic notes about bobbles before we begin. When we're increasing, you're going to want to use the tips of the needles to prevent holes. And after finishing a bobble, you're going to knit the next stitch tighter. And then when you make your bobble row, you're going to turn it on to the wrong side and you're going to pull tighter on those 3 stitches around the bobble. So meaning the stitch right before, the stitch of the bobble, and the stitch after. You're going to work those tighter and then continue in your normal tension, and that will close any potential holes or gaps in your bobble for the best look. All right, so let's go over the 3 bobbles you're going to make. We have got our first one, which I'm just calling the leaning 4-stitch bobble. Now these are not official bobble names, they're just I'm just trying to make a significant difference other than seeing MB or make bobble in a pattern, okay? This one has an increase technique with a knit front back increase, and then it has a leaning decrease, and it's working over 4 stitches. This one right here, I'm calling the centered 5-stitch bobble, and it features a yarn over increase, and it features a centered decrease, and it's working with 5 stitches. This one is the most round and bumpiest one that sticks out. It's really nice and soft. Both of these are a nice smooth texture, but from the side you can see that one is kind of flat and goes down like this, and then the other one is just kind of pops up a little bit more evenly, but from the front you can see one leans to the side and the other one's centered. Now this last one is slightly different, and it's called the Quick Increase Bobble, and I also call it 361 because you actually increase from 1 to 3 stitches, work a row, and then you go up to 6 stitches and then immediately decrease, and it's a leaning decrease, and so it has a different texture than the other bobbles. It's made to be a little smaller. It's also just made to be a quick bobble. And this is actually the one that I used in that larger sample piece. You certainly get a different look. So if you want one that's a smoother texture, then you could try one of these other two. Okay, so that's those. And we're going to learn the yarn over increase, knit front back, and leaning decrease, and also the centered decrease on these now. If you're ready with your knitting, continue on, or you can pause the video until you're ready to begin that bobble. Again, we'll have timestamps and chapters down below, so jump to the bobble that you'd like to do. We'll start with this first one here. Let's begin with the leaning 4-stitch bobble. You're going to knit 5 stitches to get to that center stitch. So on your pattern, you're going to knit until you get to where you need to make a bobble, or MB as it may be written in your pattern. Okay, so I am on this next stitch, and we are going to begin by increasing. We're going to work with the tips of our needles, so put that stitch onto the very tip of your needle, and you can hold on to it with your finger back here to keep it from dropping. We're going to be working a knit front back into the same stitch twice. So we're going to knit, pull that needle up, rotate it to the back of that stitch, and we're going to knit again, pull up a stitch. Don't let this one drop off, and we're going to do that again. Go into that stitch again, working on the tips, and knit, and then twist and go around. You can see I put it on my thumb, and I go to the back, keep it on the tips, and knit. Oops. There we go. Knit that. Okay, and now we have 4 stitches, and now you're going to drop off this old stitch like that. Okay, so now we're going to work with these 4 stitches alone. We're going to turn our work, and this is how we get our length of our bobble. So we're just going to purl, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't matter if you're throwing like me, American style, or continental, where you're holding it in the opposite hand, it's done the same way. So now I've turned it over again, and we have our 4 stitches on this side over here. Let me pull this apart so you can see our little panel forming. And we've done 1 row. We're going to do 3 more rows. So we're going to knit 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and turn, and purl. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and turn, and 1 more row. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I find it easy to count in my head. I don't normally count out loud, but that way I know that I've got all of them and I don't accidentally grab the fabric that are on the other side, or the stitches that are on the other sides. Okay, so you've got a nice little flat panel here, and now we are ready to decrease. You might actually call it binding off, but we're decreasing here. So we're going to be passing these 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, over this end stitch that has your working yarn. So we're going to keep that working yarn one in place, and we're just going to start by taking this second stitch from the end up and over. This is my right needle, but on your left it'll be on the other side. So just pass that one over and then do that 2 more times. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, try not to overstretch those as they go over, so working on the tips works really well. And then tighten that stitch up, and then we want to make sure and pop that bobble outward, or I push on the back towards the front or the right side, because we want to make sure that it goes towards the right side of the fabric. And next we're going to knit this next stitch tightly, so be sure and work on the tip of your needle and knit that, pull it tight, and then knit to the end of the row as usual. Okay, so your bobble is made, but we need to make sure it's secure and no holes, because otherwise it could leave a gap there. So we're going to turn this over and purl to 1 stitch before our bobble. So we're going to purl 4, that's 1, 2, 3, and 4, just as normal. And then we're 1 stitch before, we're going to do that tight. And then the actual bobble stitch, we're going to make sure that's nice and tight. Try and go on the very tips, tighten that up, and then do the next one tight. So those 3 stitches involving the bobble right next to it and the actual are going to be tighter, and then you can just work as your normal tension. You just continue in pattern until you need to make your next bobble. If you want this to stand out from your work and you're building your own pattern, you definitely want to add a few more rows of stockinette so that this stands out from the background. So go ahead and knit 4 or 5 more rows and join us on the right side. Pause your video and I will see you when you're ready to make the next bobble. See you in a moment. You can see this leaning 4-stitch bobble, how it is leaning in this direction here, and it is certainly flatter at the top, and then it has this little sort of a teardrop look towards the bottom. So that's really the significant thing in making one of these with a leaning decrease. All right, let's jump to the centered 5-stitch bobble. We're going to work to make our bobble, work to the center stitch. So knit 5 stitches. And using the tips of our needles, we're going to work into this 1 stitch, and we're going to leave it on the tip of our needle when we make our stitch, and we're going to increase it into 5 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and knit a stitch, pull that up, and now you need to get a yarn over on there. So just wrap your yarn around your needle and go right back into that same stitch again and knit. Pull up a stitch, so we have 3 on there now. We're going to yarn over again. That'll make our 4th stitch, and then go into that stitch one more time and knit. Pull up a loop. We now have 5 stitches, and we can drop off the old stitch. So there's our 5 stitches, and we're ready to make the length of our bobble. Go ahead and turn it over, and we're going to work in stockinette for 5 rows. So we're purl 1 row. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn. I like to count it in my head so I don't accidentally knit on the other sides and grab something I don't need. So I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 2 rows. purl, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's 3 rows. Knit 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And turn. That's 4 rows. And purl 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And when we turn, we have a small flat panel here. It's a little bit longer than the last one we did. And we want to decrease them to where the center stitch is the one in the middle. And there are 2 different ways to do this. One is you work in the back loop, or knit them all together, but really work in the back loop and knit all of these stitches together, work them all, knit 3 together, and then pull the other ones over. But I don't think it actually has as nice as a look of what I'm about to teach you. So to decrease here, we are going to be passing the center stitch back and forth between our right and left hand needles. Okay, so I'm going to try and not say right and left hand because I am going to flip this video for my left-handed knitters, but I am a right-handed knitter. So if you hear me say it, just hear the opposite name. Okay, so we're going to pass over to our dominant hand. We're going to pass over or slip 2 stitches here, 1, 2. Okay, and then we're going to working on this opposite needle here, we're going to pass over the second stitch over the first stitch. Okay, and that is going to bind it off. Okay, and then we're down to 4 stitches total. We've got 2 on each needle. Now this is our center stitch. We're going to take that stitch and move it over to this other needle, and we're going to pass over 1 stitch. Okay, and now we have 2 over here. We're going to slip back over our center stitch, and then we're going to pass over our second over the first to bind off. Oops. There we go. Do that again. Pass that stitch over. And you want to try and work on the tips of your needle so you don't overstretch them. And then now we have this these 2 stitches left. We're going to slip that center stitch over to the other needle and pass this very last one. And notice that this last one is attached to your working yarn. So slip it over and then tighten that up. And then now you want to pop your bobble toward the right side. If it's pushed back, you're just going to pop it with your finger in the back and then work the next stitch tightly. So you can go on the end of your needle, the tip, and work that tight, nice, pull it up, and then work your normal tension to the end of the row or to your next bobble. When you're finished with that row, go ahead and turn it over and work to 1 stitch before this bobble stitch. So we're going to purl 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and now we want to make sure that we close any gaps. That it's not as big of a hole here because we were already tight last time, but go ahead and knit this one, or purl that next one tight, and then the actual bobble stitch. So that's the second one. You're going to knit that one nice and tight, or purl it tight, sorry. And then you see how there's like a bigger gap here. We want to go with the next stitch and work that one very tight. So we're going to purl that and pull significantly on our stitch, and then knit as normal, or I'm sorry, purl as normal the remainder of the row. Turn it over. And you're going to work in stockinette a few rows to see what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and work those and talk to you a little bit about the smoothness of these. So the smoothness these two baubles here is because of the stockinette and because there's so many rows. You can make them longer if you want, of course, but you can also make them in reverse stockinette, so all pearls, or you could make them in garter. If you're making them in garter, it really needs to be probably 4 or 5 rows to get enough ridges in there to make it look like that. That's if you wanted a look with that in there. So it's really dependent upon you and dependent upon the project or even the pattern that you're working on. Bubbles are also great for making noses on animals. You could make grapes on a sweater, the look of buttons. They're fun to add to patterns. In an Aran sweater with a deep relief, you might want to have a larger bobble to make it stand up. You might want a smaller one. You could even mix the size of your bobbles. Okay, so just continue working on. Let's go ahead and knit another, knit a full 6 rows to get to our next bobble. And you can see how this one is nice and centered. Make it to a stopping place and I'll show you. It just has this really nice and centered look. It's really rounded. It's just a beautiful bobble, and you can tell it's not a teardrop shape like this other one. All right, continue working until you're ready for the next bobble, and we'll see you in a moment. Let's make the quick increase bobble, or the 361 as I like to call it. I'm calling it 361 so you can remember numbers that you're increasing and decreasing to. So we're going to start with our middle stitch where the bobble goes. So I'm going to knit 5 stitches in my 11 stitch swatch. And we're on this now, this next stitch here. We're going to work on the tips of our needles, and we're going to make a increase with the yarn over increase method. You can do the knit one front back and then knit one alternatively, but this would be knit one and yarn over, and then go into that same stitch again, and then knit again, stay on the tips of your needles, and now you just have 3 stitches. You can drop off that old one. We're going to turn, and we're only going to work 1 row on this one. It makes it quicker. That's why it's called the quick. So we're going to purl all 3 stitches, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, turn. We only have 3 stitches wide, and now we're going to increase each stitch individually. So we're going to do a knit front back increase. So we're going to knit 1 and then swing around to go into the back and knit that in the back. That's 2 stitches. Now we're going to go to the next one and knit in the front, swing around to the back and knit in the back. Oops. There we go. There we go. All right, drop off the old. Now we have 4 stitches, and we have this last stitch we're going to make into 2. Knit in the front, swing around, and knit into the back of the stitch. Yeah, we have 6 stitches on our dominant needle here. We have the yarn attached to the very first stitch on here. And we're going to be passing over all 5 of these stitches over this one here to make a leaning decrease. So we're going to start with the second stitch and lift it up and over the first. That's 1. Take the next stitch, move it up and over the first. That's 2. Let's do another one. 3, another one, 4, another one, 5. And then we're just going to pull on our working yarn to get it nice and tight, and then we're going to knit the next stitch nice and tight. And then after you knit that stitch, that's when you can kind of poke it through to make sure that you've got your bobble on the right side of your work, and then knit to the end of the row. And you're not done until you make sure that the stitches on either side of the bobble and the bobble itself are tightened up on the wrong side. So go ahead and purl one stitch before the bobble, just as normal. Don't go tight just yet. We want our field to look as normal as possible, the same tension. So now we're going to make this one nice and tight. Just pull on the yarn tighter, and then on the actual bobble itself, work on the tip of that needle so you don't overstretch, and tighten that up. And then the next one right after the bobble is where you could potentially have a hole, so that's especially important that you work on the tip of your needle and the tip of this one here, and then you're just gonna knit it and pull it nice and tight. Okay, and then just work as normal on the rest of them to the end of the row or the next bobble. So you can see this bobble looks a little messier than some of these other ones. You can go ahead and kind of tidy it up a little bit. I've actually done that before. What you're seeing is the sides of your stitches. So because you're not working extra rows and making it smooth like some of these other ones, you're seeing the side of it because they're leaning. This one down here below, you don't notice those little lines as much because you do have some length that was worked on that 4-stitch wide leaning bobble. So go ahead and knit a few more stitches so you can see it. I'll show you and then we'll wrap it up. All right, I've knit 6 more rows after, or worked stockinette 6 more rows after my quick increase bobble, and you can see it's a bit flat. So I just need to go and kind of poke it up through. And once I've done that, it generally stands out amongst it. But this one doesn't stick out as much as these other ones. So sometimes it can kind of be pushed flat back. It just depends on your yarn as well. So after you've washed it or something, you might have to block it back out. But it is definitely one that works up faster than some of these other ones. And it's also a smaller bobble. Now, because it's 3 stitches wide, you could also make it kind of like these, where you could even work it like this one here, this 5-stitch centered one. You could increase to 3 and work 3 or 4 rows and then make the center decrease very easily. And so it's 3 stitches wide and it has a smoother look to this. So it'll be a little bit smaller than this one, but it still has a nice round bubble or bobble. So I think that's a fun way to see different decreases, and you can also see the variety that you could make on your own and play and have fun with it. I hope you enjoyed learning about the bobble today. Tell me, which was your favorite? Which was your favorite decrease technique, or maybe your increase technique that you like the most? Do you like the bigger bobbles or the baby bobbles? Do you like a leaning one or one that's nice and bubbly bobble? What's your favorite? Be sure and click down below and let us know. Also subscribe and hit that boop like icon button to tell us that you loved it and you want more videos like this. Thank you so much for joining me at GoodKnit Kisses. Have a great day and happy knitting and crochet. Thanks for joining us today, where we help you stitch your love and love your stitches. See you again soon.